Hey guys! Tonight we're going to drift back to a time when the soft flicker of a firefly was more than just an insect's glow. It was a whole summer evening's worth of quiet joy. No fireworks, no speeches, just little dots of warm light rising over rice paddies and drifting through temple gardens like the sky forgot where to draw the stars. You probably won't survive this unless you're capable of handling extreme tranquility. Gentle river breezes and several polite bows in a row without exploding from calm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments now. Dim the lights, maybe open a window to let in the night air, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a grassy riverbank just outside Edo, what's now Tokyo. It's sometime in the mid-18th century, and the air is thick with the sound of frogs, the scent of summer rain on bamboo, and a soft shimmer of lanterns swaying gently from the trees. There's no crowd, just people spaced evenly along the path, their voices lowered to something like prayer or laughter's shadow. They're waiting, not for fireworks, not for a performer, just for the fireflies. And when they begin to rise, no one claps, no one gasps. They simply notice, as if the evening has turned a page. And now it's time to read in a different light. Here's your mainstream historical fact during Japan's Edo period, 1603–1868. Firefly viewing, or horogari, became a seasonal ritual for people across classes. What began as a poetic image, fireflies as metaphors for lost love or fleeting moments, gradually became a structured social activity with specific locations, timing, and etiquette. People planned entire evenings around watching them. This wasn't hunting. This wasn't spectacle. It was participation in something gentle. You didn't go to see the fireflies. You went to be with them. There's a fringe detail that appears in a few travelogues from the period. Some visitors from Kyoto described firefly viewing in Edo as almost too quiet, noting that people rarely spoke above a whisper once the lights began to rise. One writer claimed that even the insects seemed to prefer Tokyo's politeness. Obviously, that's not entomologically sound, but it's very on brand. You walk now down a path lit only by moonlight and the occasional paper lantern on either side. Narrow canals reflect the shimmer of fireflies. Some blink rapidly, others pulse slow and soft, like they're breathing. A few people carry fans, not to wave, but to shield the glow for a moment, just long enough to see the insect's shape before letting it return to darkness. It's not just families here. There are students with notebooks, couples walking hand in hand, a monk with a flute he never raises. Firefly evenings aren't events, they're environments. The fireflies arrive when they want to. The point isn't to catch them. The point is to adjust to their rhythm. And that leads to your first scholarly uncertainty. Why did firefly viewing become so codified during the Edo period? Some historians argue it was a reaction to urban life, an effort to reconnect with nature in a city growing increasingly structured. Others think it was tied to older spiritual beliefs, repurposed for leisure in a more peaceful age. There's no official decree, no start date. It just caught on, like a good breeze. You pass a low wooden bridge now, where two children kneel beside the water. They're not reaching in, they're just watching. One of them has a small cage made of twigs and silk thread. It's empty. It might stay that way. This is the journey style part of your evening, not through forests or mountains, but through atmosphere, a pace, a posture. The fireflies guide you, not with sound, not with urgency, but with rhythm. You follow their light, not because you need to know where they're going, but because it's enough to be near. In many parts of Edo, people returned to the same viewing spot year after year, not out of tradition, out of hope. Fireflies weren't guaranteed, they were conditional on weather, on water, on silence. You didn't demand them, you waited. One popular poem of the era reads, "The fireflies rise, not because we are watching, but because it is time." No one speaks that poem aloud tonight, but someone thinks it, and someone else, maybe, feels it. A firefly floats past your face, briefly close enough to illuminate the space between thoughts. Then it's gone. That was enough. The heat hasn't lifted. It's the kind of summer night that wraps around your ankles like warm water and doesn't apologize. But there's movement, small, slow, purposeful, a fan opening, a sandal sliding, a firefly, drifting just above a bamboo stalk and blinking once, twice, as if confirming it has nothing better to do. You've arrived at a place where the light doesn't come from above. It hovers, it wanders, and for a few weeks each year in Edo period Japan, it meant everything. This wasn't the start of summer. It wasn't even the midpoint. Fireflies appeared only during a narrow window, late June into early July. Their emergence wasn't random. It was expected, welcomed, marked in calendars, and written into poetry when they arrived. People nodded to each other, like an old friend had returned from a long, polite absence. Here's your mainstream historical fact during the Edo period. The appearance of fireflies, Hotaru, was widely recognized as a seasonal cue, a cultural signpost. Japan's calendar wasn't just divided by months, it was structured around seasonal events, or kigo, which were integral to everything from agriculture to poetry. Fireflies were a summer kigo as essential as cicadas or afternoon rain. Their arrival didn't just suggest summer, it defined it. You're standing now beneath a willow tree at the edge of a narrow canal. Its branches droop into the water, and from behind them, points of light begin to emerge, slowly, quietly, no fanfare, just dots, blinking against the reeds like someone stitched the air with soft embers. Families gather nearby, not in clusters, but in lines. There's spacing that is deliberate, enough room to see without blocking another's view. A boy sits cross-legged in the dirt, a wooden paddle resting across his knees. He isn't trying to catch the fireflies. He's just watching the way they loop. Fringe detail in some districts. Local calendars were reprinted every year with small symbols in the margins. Flowers, birds, insects. A stylized firefly would be placed beside specific dates, often alongside notes like evening humidity favorable or best seen near footbridge after rainfall. These weren't scientific forecasts. They were seasonal whispers, a reminder to go look. And here's your scholarly uncertainty why we're fireflies. Specifically, given so much cultural weight when other summer insects, like cicadas, were louder, more constant, more present. Some scholars point to their brevity, others to their association with classical literature, where they symbolized impermanence and the unseen world. Still others say it's simply the light, that soft, pulsing glow that asked for attention without ever demanding it. You wander now between two low lanterns marking the edge of a path. They give off a steady light, square and warm, but the fireflies, they drift beside them, slower, uneven, more alive. The contrast isn't jarring, it's gentle, like punctuation, in a sentence that never needs to end. In one neighborhood near Sumida River, a tradition developed around this precise moment, the first evening of fireflies. Local families would bring rice balls and plum wine to a specific bend in the river. No music, no speeches, just the act of sitting, eating slowly, and waiting. When the first firefly blinked, a ripple of bowed heads would pass down the bank, not a performance, a gratitude. This is your journey style moment. You sit with them now, knees folded, sleeves tucked back, hair pinned up. You're offered a fan with a chrysanthemum painted on it. So you don't wave it. You hold it so quietly. You've become part of the setting. And for a few minutes, no one speaks. Because what's happening isn't entertainment, it's arrival. A grandmother leans over to her grandson and whispers, "They came back." He doesn't ask from where. A group of young women murmur about the way the lights look like they're swimming. One adds that she heard fireflies don't glow when they're afraid. No one argues. It doesn't matter if it's true. In this world, the glow means something, and that's enough. You glance down and notice that your shadow has changed, not because anything moved overhead, but because the fireflies have settled behind you now, casting a kind of backwards light. You turn, one blinks, and for a moment, the night holds its breath. You've left the bustle of the town path behind, though bustle is a generous word for such a slow, quiet procession. Now you're walking along a narrower lane, one that leads past temple gates and garden walls, toward the kind of places where sound fades differently, softer, as though the earth here has agreed to hold on to the quiet a little longer. The air is heavy with warmth, but not unpleasantly so. It carries the scent of moss, damp stone, and the faintest trace of plum incense from a nearby shrine. And ahead, just where the curve of the road meets the low edge of a bridge, there's a small crowd, but they aren't facing each other. They're all looking out, toward the water, because this, they know, is where the light gathers. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Certain locations in Edo period Japan became especially famous for their firefly populations. These were often near slow-moving rivers, temple ponds, or rice paddies, places with clean water, ample vegetation, and open views, places where the fireflies would return year after year. Some of these became so well known that they were named in travel guides, their glowing insects drawn with soft brushstrokes beside maps and schedules for ferries. The most beloved viewing spots weren't always the easiest to reach. Part of the ritual was the going, the walk, the wait, the approach. People would bring low stools, folding fans, sake in painted flasks. There were no tickets, no designated rows, just shared understanding this place, tonight, is for the fireflies. Fringe detail in one garden near Kyoto. Caretakers posted polite signs asking visitors not to wear strong perfume or bring loud bells, for fear it might confuse the glow. The sign was not enforced, but everyone complied, not out of law, out of respect for the place and for the insects who had no idea they were being anticipated. You step onto the bridge now. Beneath it, a narrow creek. Its banks are thick with reeds and wild mint, and between the stems, dots of light blink in and out, not rhythmically, not chaotically, but in a rhythm you didn't know you already recognized. They don't rise in swarms, they rise in waves. You watch as a small patch goes dark, then pulses again, and each time, someone along the bridge exhales softly, not a gasp, just a reminder that they're here. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did people travel to these sites for the fireflies themselves, or for what the fireflies symbolized? Some records suggest practical motivations, good visibility, consistent weather. Others are full of language about renewal, about peace, about the spirit light believed to flicker inside each insect. The truth is likely both. These were real places, but they were also metaphors with coordinates. One journal from 1775 describes a visit to a firefly bend outside Edo. They lit no lanterns that evening. They allowed the insects to mark the edge of things. Even the water seemed slower in their presence. Your journey-style immersion in this section is not a path you walk. It's a space you stand in. You pause at the center of the bridge. One sleeve brushes the wood railing. A firefly floats near your face and drifts past. You turn slightly, not to follow it, but to give it room. Someone beside you murmurs. They seem to prefer the left side tonight. You don't know whether that's observation or poetry. You nod. Either way, the fireflies don't cover the sky. They don't outshine the stars. They just fill in the space between breaths. And in this moment, you begin to understand the layout of the evening. First comes the walking, then the waiting, then the noticing, and finally, the stillness. That rare, borrowed kind of stillness that has nothing to do with absence and everything to do with presence. You stay on the bridge a while longer. The glow deepens, not in brightness, but in number. The night feels full, now, not crowded, just complete. No one says it aloud, but everyone here knows this is where the light gathers, and this is why they came. The night has settled into its rhythm now, steady, quiet, and almost ceremonial. You've wandered a little farther from the water, into a walled garden not far from a merchant's house. The gate swings open with no creak. The gravel path has been swept, the lanterns trimmed, and just inside, a group of people move with the precision of those who've done this before. This isn't a formal event. No announcements, no music, no toasts, just soft murmurs, subtle fabrics, and an unspoken agreement to match the pace of the fireflies. Because when people came to watch fireflies, they dressed for it, not extravagantly, but deliberately. Here's your mainstream historical fact during the Edo period. Clothing for evening outings, especially seasonal occasions like firefly viewing, was chosen with care. Men and women wore yukata made of light cotton or linen, often dyed with summer motifs, water wheels, bamboo leaves, dragonflies, or morning glories. These garments weren't formal like the layered kimono worn to shrines or tea ceremonies. They were simpler, functional, breathable, but beautiful in their own way. Accessories were just as seasonal. Handheld fans, usually painted with images of water or nightbirds, small pouches for folding notes or verses. Some guests wore subtle firefly-shaped hairpins made of tin or shell, not to impress, to belong to the evening, to the quiet, to the light. A fringe detail turns up in a few illustrated diaries. People sometimes selected garments based on how the fireflies would reflect off the fabric. Light-colored robes showed the glow best. Darker ones allowed it to pass unnoticed. Some hosts even encouraged guests to wear colors that wouldn't distract the fireflies, believing, rightly or not, that calmer hues would result in closer visits. You stand now beside a bench where a woman adjusts the collar of her robe. It's pale blue, printed with a subtle spray of wisteria. She's pinned a folded fan to her obi. She hasn't opened it. She probably won't. It's there like a polite sentence that doesn't need to be spoken. And here's your scholarly uncertainty: was this attention to appearance truly for the fireflies? Or for each other? Diaries from the time suggest both. Young couples referenced choosing colors together. Friends discussed how certain fabrics looked better in firefly light. But many also wrote about preparing for the evening alone, laying out robes, dusting sandals, brushing sleeves smooth before stepping out into the dusk. It wasn't about being seen, it was about being in step with the insects, with the season, with the moment. You sit near a low table where several guests have gathered. Someone pours cold barley tea. A small tray of pickled plums rests at the center. Untouched, conversation is almost non existent. There's a kind of shared, friendly silence. One man gently plucks a thread from his cuff and flicks it into the bushes. Another woman adjusts a loose hairpin. No one rushes. No one poses. They're simply making themselves presentable to the night. This is your journey-style moment, not a walk, not a scene, but a kind of soft preparation. You adjust your sleeve. You smooth your hair. You notice, without needing to act. The fireflies are still in the trees, distant for now. But everyone here behaves as though they're watching already. A girl beside you leans forward and whispers. If you're very still, one might land on your lap. Then she shrugs, as if to say, or not. That's fine too, and that's the mood of this section. Not expectation, not anticipation, just readiness. There's a phrase that appears in an old Firefly verse: to wear quietness so well that the fireflies choose to stay a while. No one here recites it aloud, but they're all living it. You've returned to the water now, but not the riverbank. You're stepping onto a small wooden boat, the kind that barely creaks as you move. The boatman bows, not to greet you, but to acknowledge the quiet. A low lantern swings from the bow, casting golden rings that stretch across the surface of the canal and fade before they meet the banks. Tonight, the water is a mirror. You settle onto a cushion with a view to both sides. The boat is slow, not because it must be, but because it should be. This isn't travel. It's a kind of floating attention, because on summer nights in Edo period Japan, firefly viewing often left the shore behind and moved to the water, where everything could unfold without obstruction, and the reflections doubled the magic. Here's your mainstream historical fact: yakitabane, or pleasure boats, were a common sight in urban centers, like Edo during the 18th and 19th centuries. While some were used for musical performances or cherry blossom viewing in spring, they became particularly beloved for firefly nights. Guests would board in the early evening, sip tea or sake, and drift quietly through canals and rivers, letting the insects rise and flicker around them. It wasn't about entertainment, it was about alignment, with season, with nature, with each other. This wasn't a tour, it was a pause. Fringe details some boatmen were known to guide their crafts with cloth-wrapped oars, muffling the sound of movement, not to sneak up on fireflies, but to avoid disrupting the moment. It was said that a sudden splash could cause the insects to rise all at once, ruining the delicate rhythm of their ascent. You drift beneath a low bridge now. Its wooden underside is cool and damp, and for a moment, all sound narrows into the ripple of water and the faint creak of rope. Then, there they are, fireflies, rising from the reeds at both banks, pulsing against the dark like someone forgot to tie the stars down. One lands briefly on the edge of the boat's rail. No one moves. Then it lifts again, trailing a streak of gold in the air behind it. Your companions say nothing. One holds a folded fan to her chest. Another traces circles in the condensation on a cup. The fireflies require nothing from you, but they give freely. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did firefly viewing by boat begin as a continuation of land-based rituals, or as its own parallel tradition? Some records suggest the former. Boats were simply more private, more flexible. Others believe they were an entirely different expression of the same feeling, not looking at the world, but moving through it, gently as it glows. The poet Wada Akinari once wrote, "The boat was slow. The light was slower still. I did not arrive anywhere, but I was entirely present. You lean slightly over the side of the boat now, careful not to touch the water. Beneath the surface, a few fireflies shimmer. It's unclear whether they've landed on floating grass or if their reflections are so perfect they've become another layer of being." The boatman steers without speaking. He knows the route, not because it's fixed, but because the rhythm of the fireflies changes subtly, night by night. Tonight, they favor the right bank. Last week, it was the shallows. No one knows why. No one minds. Journey-wise, this isn't a path, and it's a circuit. You'll return to the dock eventually. But there's no countdown, only motion, and moments, and a shared hush that becomes more comfortable the longer it lingers. Above you, a willow leans across the canal. Its leaves trail the water, and for one perfect minute, the fireflies gather beneath it. 20, maybe more. They pulse like a breath, like a memory trying to stay. And just as suddenly, they drift upward, dissolve into the trees, and vanish. No one tries to follow. The boat continues. So do you. The boat has returned you to shore now, gliding to a stop so quietly you weren't sure it had happened until you felt the stillness again. You step off, your feet meeting stone steps, still warm from the day. The night is deeper now, but not darker. Fireflies have gathered in the trees above, blinking like soft, uncertain lanterns. You follow a narrow path that curls behind a tea house. Inside, you can hear the low rustle of cloth, the occasional clink of ceramic, and nothing more. But just beyond its paper walls, someone has left a folded scroll and an ink brush on a bench, because sometimes firefly viewing wasn't about seeing, it was about responding. Here's your mainstream historical fact during the Edo period. Firefly evenings inspired a small but steady stream of written verse, mostly haiku and waka. Poets, both amateur and renowned, would bring small rolls of paper and brushes with them to gardens, riverbanks, or boats. Some wrote on the spot. Others waited until the fireflies were gone and the silence returned. Either way, the poems weren't shared with a crowd. They were folded, pocketed, and carried home like fireflies in the mind. The firefly was a near perfect subject for Japanese poetry. Brief, luminous, elusive. It captured the idea of mono no aware, the gentle sadness at the passing of things, and also the delight of the moment itself. One well known waka reads a single firefly. It hovers by my sleeve hem and does not know why I hold still for it, longer than I would for any guest. Fringe detail, there were entire collections of firefly verses compiled during the period, most of them privately printed or copied by hand. Some were left at tea houses for others to find. A few were even tucked into small fans, hidden unless opened at just the right moment. The poetry wasn't performative. It was intimate, like whispering to the night and trusting that it heard you. You stop now beside a cedar tree where someone has tied a short poem to a low branch with red string. The paper flutters. It reads, drifting in the reeds. Even my thoughts blink softly. I'll write them later. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did these poems serve as documentation, or were they emotional echoes? Written only for the sake of writing, historians disagree. Some point to their detailed references to time, weather, and place as evidence of informal field notes. Others believe the poems were never meant to be accurate. They were just reflections, like the insects themselves, never still, never fully held. This is your journey style immersion, now not a walk through space, but through silence. You sit on a small stool beneath a paper lantern. Someone has left ink and a brush beside you. No one expects you to write, but if you do, no one will read it, not unless you want them to, around you. Others are doing the same, quietly composing, or simply holding the brush, waiting for a thought to arrive in the shape of a line, or not. The point isn't the poem, it's the pause that invites it. A firefly lands on the rim of your ink pot. It flickers once, then again. You don't move, it lifts off, drifts toward the lantern, then veers into the darkness. Someone nearby sighs, not sadly, just because the moment asked for a sound. That's the rhythm of firefly poetry. Light, pause, light again. A sentence you never quite finish because the glow moved on before you did. You look down at the scroll beside you, blank, waiting. You may write something, you may not. Either way, the fireflies will continue. The path opens into a clearing now, less manicured, more like a wide breath taken by the landscape. The grass is a little longer. The trees are spaced with more casual generosity. And there, at the far end of the clearing, you see the smallest of gatherings, a family, not dressed for ceremony, no scrolls, no boats, just a mother, a father, and two children seated on a woven mat, each holding a small cage that glows from within. The fireflies are not trapped, not in the way that feels cruel. These cages are open at the top, their lattice frames made of fine bamboo, and the children hold them gently, cupping their hands over the openings like they are keeping in a wish. This is the quieter side of firefly evenings, the family ritual, the part that happens away from poems and riverboats, the part passed down not in ink, but in how you hold your hand steady enough not to frighten the light. Here's your mainstream historical fact during the Edo period. It was common for families, especially those with young children, to participate in firefly viewing on a smaller, more intimate scale. Children often used handheld cages, known as Hotorubako firefly boxes, constructed of wood and thin paper or mesh, to gently catch fireflies at dusk. These were not permanent enclosures. They were part of a cycle catch. Observe, release. Fringe detail many families taught their children the 3-count catch, an old technique where you watched a firefly blink, then moved to catch it precisely between flashes. It wasn't foolproof. That wasn't the point. It was about rhythm, about matching the pulse of something delicate. You watch now as one of the children lifts a firefly from the edge of his sleeve and coaxes it toward the cage opening. He doesn't push it in. He waits, eventually. The insect drifts downward and settles without resistance. The box lights up faintly. He smiles, but says nothing. The girl beside him holds her cage open with both hands. She's caught none tonight, and doesn't seem bothered. She hums, soft, off-key, barely audible, a lullaby for things that don't sleep the way we do. Here's your scholarly uncertainty were these activities, educational entertainment, or just a quiet way to help children practice presence. Historians can only guess. Few written records exist, just drawings, a few scraps of household notes, and memories pass through generations. What's clear is that children weren't excluded from the ritual. They were often the ones who understood it best. One diary entry from a woman in Osaka reads, "My daughter caught none, but she said she saw one blink at her." And that was enough. You sit now at the edge of the clearing, not intruding, not separate. The grass is warm beneath your hands. You don't need a cage, you don't need a catch, just the nearness of the glow. The children's father releases his fireflies one by one, each time. He lifts the box slowly, tips it toward the breeze, and waits. A pause, a soft blink. Then the insect lifts, light as ash, deliberate as thought. The mother unties a cloth parcel, revealing rice balls wrapped in leaves. The children eat with one hand, holding their boxes with the other. Even now, no one raises their voice, and this is your journey-style immersion to sit, to share in the stillness, to feel that slight pulse of warmth near your wrist and not react. One of the fireflies lands on your sleeve. It glows once, pauses, then steps off into the air like it has remembered something better to do. There's no applause, no exclamation, just one of the children whispering that one was brave. No one argues. You remain a little longer, watching as the fireflies begin to drift higher. The children stop catching. They begin to release, one at a time. Their empty boxes are still glowing faintly, not from light, but from the attention they've held. And just before you rise, the mother wraps the mat, folds it over twice, and nods once to the clearing as if thanking it. The family walks away. The fireflies stay. You follow the family's path only for a little while, just far enough to see their silhouettes disappear behind a hedge of hydrangeas. Then you pause, because something else is happening now, something slower than catching, quieter than watching. It's the part of the night when people begin letting go. You're in a grove now. The trees here are spaced like they've been politely asked to stand apart. The fireflies are thickest near the ground. No one's chasing them. In fact, many are standing completely still, holding their hotrubako, their delicate cages, with both hands. Some are lifting the lids. Others already have. What you're seeing is not a game, it's a practice. Here's your mainstream historical fact during Edo period firefly viewing. Catching fireflies was always paired with releasing them. This wasn't a rule, it was a rhythm. The release was as essential as the gathering. People brought their fireflies home for a single evening, sometimes to light a room with soft flashes, sometimes to share with someone unable to walk to the river, but they were almost always released by the next night, often at the same spot where they were caught. The insects were never kept long. Their lives were too short, their glow too fragile. There's a phrase that turns up in a few household accounts. Light does not belong to the cage. It wasn't a proverb. It wasn't even poetic. It was just what people said, often while tying the knot on a cage lid before walking back to the banks. Your fringe detail in some regions. People practiced a kind of informal light, releasing ceremony on the seventh night of the season. Families would gather their remaining fireflies, release them all at once, and offer a short phrase, often just a thank you. One family wrote theirs down. You gave us a warm evening. Return to your sky. You kneel now near one of the low trees. Someone beside you opens a small box and lifts it gently. A firefly clings to the edge for a moment, then drifts out slowly, as if uncertain of the freedom. Another release follows, then another. No one cheers. It is not a release in the dramatic sense. It is not letting go. It is letting continue. This is your journey style detail. You open your own hands, empty as they are, and watch the fireflies pass through the space between your fingers, not because they know you're there, but because you are not in their way. Someone nearby whispers a poem, not loudly, not for anyone to hear clearly. Let the light go back to where it was before us, and forgive our gaze. The scholarly uncertainty here is philosophical. Was this release seen as moral, practical, or symbolic? Some argue it was about maintaining the local firefly population, a rare example of environmental awareness before the term existed. Others suggest it was more emotional, even spiritual, a moment to recognize the ephemerality of both the glow and the person witnessing it. But no one seems burdened here. The release doesn't feel like loss, it feels like rhythm, like breathing out after holding your breath for too long. You sit longer than expected. The last cage near you is opened. The fireflies do not rush out. They drift, as if to say we knew you would. The person beside you, an older man in a simple linen robe, ties the cage shut and sets it aside, empty now. It still glows in your memory. He bows slightly to the tree, to the moment, and to nothings in particular. You follow suit, and the night carries on. The grove narrows again into a path, just wide enough for two people to walk shoulder to shoulder in silence. Bamboo rustles faintly overhead. A pair of lanterns mark the entrance to a clearing where something unexpected lingers, the scent of grilled rice, sweet miso, and early summer fruit. Yes, it turns out even quiet evenings come with snacks. Because firefly nights weren't just about observation, they were about atmosphere, and as the tradition grew, so too did the small rituals of comfort that accompanied it. Here's your mainstream historical fact by the late Edo period. Firefly viewing areas in larger towns and river districts began to include food stalls, souvenir vendors, and games similar to what one might find at a small festival, though quieter and far less crowded. These weren't raucous gatherings. They were an extension of the evening's stillness, vendors chosen as much for their restraint as their wares. You stroll now past a row of makeshift stands set beneath paper umbrellas. No one calls out to advertise. The vendors speak softly, gesturing toward bowls of dango rice dumplings, chilled slices of cucumber on skewers, or little parcels of bean paste wrapped in leaves. A tray of tiny wind chimes tinkles in the breeze. They're not for sale, they're just there. Fringe details some Firefly food stalls carried special summer-only confections shaped like insects. One rare treat, known as Hotaru Yokan, was a small, jelly-like sweet-dyed faintly green with a dot of citrus rind meant to represent the firefly's light. When eaten by moonlight, it shimmered slightly, enough to merit a smile, never a fuss. You stop beside a vendor wrapping mochi in bamboo leaves. He nods once in greeting, says nothing more. A small sign hanging beside him reads "No fires needed. The glow is enough." This is not a market in the traditional sense. There is no bartering, no music, no shouting children. It's more like a resting place disguised as a gathering. Everyone here is moving slowly, carrying things carefully, eating with small bites and long pauses between them. You sit on a low bench beneath a tree where fireflies still flicker. One guest unwraps a parcel and finds a rice ball nestled beside a folded poem. He reads it, then folds it again. Doesn't share the words, just smiles and continues eating. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. How much of this commercialization was welcomed by those seeking stillness? Some records suggest tension. Traditionalists who feared that the presence of vendors diluted the purity of the ritual. Others, however, describe the food stalls as an enhancement, not a disruption, but a way to ground the experience in the body. After all, hunger and beauty often arrive together. One poet wrote, "A plum blossom sweet pressed to the tongue, then fireflies moved through my throat's sky." Your journey-style moment is brief here. You rise from the bench and approach a woman selling chilled shu, plum wine served over crushed ice. She hands you a ceramic cup wrapped in a linen cloth to catch the condensation. There is no price discussed. You bow. She bows. The transaction is over. And the drink, it tastes like the color green just before a storm. You walk slowly back through the path of stalls. A boy plays a game involving paper scoops and floating balls. A man nearby presses tiny ink stamps onto fans shaped like leaves. The fireflies drift between them, not drawn, not repelled, so just present, like everyone else. No one rushes. No one finishes what they're eating too quickly. A few guests carry their food with them, letting it go cold. The point wasn't flavor. The point was holding something small, something comforting, something glowing from the inside out. The path begins to thin again now, leaving behind the food stalls and folding fans, winding instead through a quieter part of the garden. The lanterns are fewer here. The trees stand farther apart. You can still see fireflies, of course, but now they appear one at a time, blinking softly in and out of view like small, kindly punctuation marks in an otherwise wordless evening. You find yourself walking beside a narrow stream, barely a trickle over smooth stones. It doesn't announce itself. You only know it's there because its sound is gentler than silence. And this is where something deeper settles in. Because even in a night full of motion, of families, food, drifting boats, silence was always part of the ritual. Not awkward, not imposed, just natural. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Edo period, firefly viewing was characterized not only by what people did, but by what they didn't. The most respected firefly evenings were known for their restraint. Guests often arrived with the understanding that conversation would be minimal. Musicians, if present, played sparingly, and entire gardens were laid out with acoustics in mind, stones placed to muffle footsteps, bamboo used to disperse wind, paths that curved rather than echoed. It wasn't a rule, but it was a shared understanding silence allows light to be seen more clearly. Fringe detail in some towns, small signs were hung near firefly viewing sites with short, almost poetic reminders: walk as the fireflies do, without hurry. Let the trees speak first. Do not teach the night how to sound. These weren't laws, that's just invitations. And here's your scholarly uncertainty: was the silence practiced out of spiritual belief, social etiquette, or something simpler? Some argue it was related to Shinto ideas of sacred presence. Others believe it was just common sense. Fireflies don't like crowds, and people who wanted to see them learned to quiet down. There's no consensus, only pattern. You pause now beside a patch of tall grass. Someone else is sitting nearby, an elderly woman, barefoot, with her sleeves tucked up and her hands resting lightly on her knees. She nods at you, but doesn't speak. She's not meditating, she's just there. A firefly lands on a nearby stone, blinks, waits, leaves. No one comments. And that is your journey style moment. Now stillness without intention. No sketchbook in your lap, no poem in your pocket, no firefly to catch. You're not missing anything. You're with it entirely. Above. The leaves shift slightly. You hear one fall, but don't see where it lands. You step onto a stretch of path lined with tatami mats, temporary, soft, slightly scented from storage. A few others walk ahead of you, their movements so light they barely leave sound behind. Every few steps, someone pauses, not to look at anything in particular, just to feel the space. You pause too, and then the sounds emerge, not from you, not from anyone, but from the world itself. The wind, a frog, once, the water, again, a distant cough, muffled by sleeve, and between all of that, the blink of a firefly, one, then another, farther off, a third. This wasn't performance, it was punctuation. The night has its own grammar, and you're reading it without needing to translate. A nearby note on a stone reads between the flickers. The world says more than I can. You don't know who wrote it, or when. You don't need to. You step off the path and into a patch of moss. It cradles your feet. You stop moving, not because you're tired, because everything important is happening in the space between motion, and the fireflies, they seem closer now, but maybe they've always been. You leave the path behind entirely now. The ground softens beneath your feet. No more stone, no more moss, just earth. A low ridge rises ahead, where trees cluster more tightly, forming a loose archway of branches. Beyond that, a clearing unlike the others. There's something different here, a little more formal, a little more arranged. Stone lanterns mark the edges. A cloth banner hangs between two pine trunks. unmarked but carefully stitched. A fragrance lingers that isn't just garden, it's incense, soft, sweet, and slow to rise. This is not the space of ordinary Firefly viewers. This is where the aristocrats watched. Here's your mainstream historical fact among the courtly classes in Edo and earlier Heian period Japan. Firefly viewing was a refined seasonal activity that combined aesthetic pleasure with subtle social performance. Nobles and scholars gathered in private gardens, on temple terraces, or aboard elaborately appointed riverboats to experience firefly nights with a curated quietness. These weren't public festivals, they were composed evenings marked by poetry, layered robes, carefully chosen incense, and often no conversation at all. One diary from a court poet describes such a night as a room without walls, shared with insects of flame. We made no noise, only verses. The fringe detail firefly viewings among the elite sometimes involved symbolic gestures. A fan, held aloft but unopened, signaled that a poem had been composed but not yet shared. A glance toward a particular part of the garden might imply that a story or memory was being evoked, even if never spoken aloud. The fireflies were not background, they were participants in the etiquette of evening. You sit now at the edge of a stone platform overlooking a darkened pond. Several people in fine, layered garments kneel in a quiet arc. One holds a fan, one a folded sheet of paper. No one seems to be watching the fireflies directly. Instead, they observe the space where fireflies may appear, because in this setting, anticipation itself is part of the ritual. And here's your scholarly uncertainty were these events religious, poetic, or political. Some scholars argue they served as metaphors for impermanence, closely linked to Buddhist aesthetics. Others note their function as courtly bonding, silent alignment around taste, restraint, and seasonal awareness. Still others suggest they were simply beautiful nights, preserved in memory through poem and gesture, unburdened by deeper meaning. There is a document from the Imperial Archives describing a firefly evening in Kyoto. No songs were sung, no food was served. There was nothing to observe, except each other observing the light. Your journey-style moment now is barely perceptible. You shift your posture on the stone. You match your breath to the pattern of the nearest firefly. You don't speak. You don't write. You simply share the moment with those who have gathered, not as strangers, not quite as companions, but as witnesses. A breeze passes. A firefly rises just beyond the edge of the pond. It lifts and turns, alone, deliberate, like it's been sent to check the atmosphere. Everyone watches. No one follows. You think of the scrolls stored in lacquer boxes, filled with the poems composed on nights like this. Some never read aloud, some lost, some never written at all. Their value was in the experience of being close to words not yet spoken. The woman nearest you adjusts her sleeve. The fabric catches the firefly's light for just a moment. That is the entire poem. You rise, not to leave, but to let the moment expand. As you do, a single line from an old aristocratic verse drifts through your thoughts. In firefly light, the world forgets to finish its sentences, and tonight, that feels true. You're farther from the center now. The lanterns are fewer, the trees taller, the air heavier with the scent of damp bark and night flowers. The formalities have faded behind you, and what remains is just the slow breathing of the landscape. The fireflies are still here, but there are fewer than before, not because they've gone, because time has passed. You walk along a wooden footbridge spanning a narrow, overgrown stream. Once, this might have been a bustling path during firefly season. Now, the wood creaks a little more, and the bushes that once framed the view have grown thick, unruly, and where 10, 20 fireflies might have gathered before, now there are 2, maybe 3. This section of the garden carries a different kind of quiet. It's the quiet of after. Here's your mainstream historical fact by the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The tradition of firefly viewing in Japan began to decline in many regions. Rapid urbanization, deforestation, and the pollution of waterways, especially during the industrial boom of the Meiji era, led to a sharp reduction in firefly populations. Rivers were redirected, gardens gave way to buildings. The spaces where fireflies once gathered simply ceased to exist. And yet, the memory didn't fade. Quite the opposite. The loss seemed to make the tradition more precious. People began writing about firefly evenings with nostalgia, painting them, staging them in kabuki performances, and preserving them in fiction and film. The firefly became a symbol not only of summer, but of things that were beautiful because they were fading. Fringe detail in 1924. A group of school children in the city of Kumamoto petitioned their local government to protect a stream known for firefly gatherings. Their request led to one of the first municipally protected insect habitats in Japan. A sign was posted for those who remember the light and those who hope to see it again. You pause now beside a small plaque, weathered by rain. The text is almost unreadable, but you recognize the kanji for hotaru, firefly. There's one nearby. It hovers for a moment near a fern, then disappears into the brush. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Did the preservation efforts succeed purely because of ecological concern, or because fireflies had become sacred in people's memories? Most scholars agree it was both. They weren't saving just the insects. They were saving a kind of evening, a kind of attention. You pass through an older section of the garden, where a new path has been laid beside an old one, now nearly covered in moss. A small group of visitors is gathered near a recently planted grove, part of a modern firefly habitat created in the last few decades. One of them is explaining the process softly. No pesticides, native vegetation, still water with shaded banks. But he stops talking as a single firefly rises from the grass and loops through the air. Everyone falls silent. Your journey-style immersion here is gentle but profound. You sit on a worn wooden bench, not an antique, just a recent addition meant to invite stillness. You don't lean back. You don't check the time. You look out into a clearing where 4 or 5 fireflies are doing their best to carry the whole season. And somehow, they succeed. They blink slowly, as if conserving not only light, but meaning. A child nearby whispers, "It's like they're writing letters in the dark." Someone replies, and we're reading them very slowly. No one says anything more. The fireflies in this part of the garden are part of a program now. They're monitored. Their larvae are counted. Their food plants tracked. But none of that feels clinical. It feels careful, protective, hopeful. In a park near Kyoto, a guide once said, We cannot make more fireflies, but we can make it easier for them to arrive. You sit a little longer, not to see more, but to remember what few still means. The path continues. You'll follow it when the glow fades. But not before. The garden has changed again. This time, not in silence, but in intent. You're moving through a space that doesn't pretend to be untouched. Gravel paths are smooth and even. Lanterns have clearly been placed by someone with a diagram. There's signage, simple, elegant, and low ropes cordon off areas where grass has been replanted. And yet, the feeling is still familiar, because what you're entering now is not an ancient garden. It's a revival. Here's your mainstream historical fact in the latter half of the 20th century. As Japan urbanized further and traditional firefly habitats dwindled, communities began creating dedicated firefly parks, carefully maintained environments designed to preserve and reintroduce firefly populations. These spaces were engineered with native plant species, low artificial light, and monitored water conditions. The goal wasn't just conservation, it was continuity. People wanted to return to something they missed, even if they hadn't lived through it themselves. These modern firefly festivals blend tradition and infrastructure. They often feature timed evening entry, informational signs, guided paths, and designated quiet zones. But most importantly, they preserve the core principle: come gently, look closely, say little. Fringe detail in several of these parks. Volunteers are trained not only in firefly biology, but in traditional etiquette. They help maintain silence, redirect flashlights, and occasionally offer printed poems to guests. One park in Okayama even has a small verse box where visitors can write their thoughts and drop them in anonymously. Read aloud only on the final night of the season. You pause now beside a group of visitors seated on folding stools. A staff member hands out small paper fans printed with stylized fireflies and the kanji for UK, evening scene. The guests nod. Some use the fans, some don't. The gesture is the point. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Do these modern firefly parks preserve the original experience, or do they transform it into something else? Some argue they're necessary adaptations, living examples of how tradition survives. Others worry that the presence of signs, schedules, and phone cameras creates too much awareness and not enough wonder. But many agree it's not about replicating the past, it's about carrying the mood forward. A child beside you holds her phone screen downward. She's been told not to take photos. She doesn't mind. She opens her palm, and a firefly hovers briefly above it before darting away. I didn't want to catch it. She whispers, I just wanted to be still. That's your journey style moment now. You don't move, you don't search, you wait, and in waiting, the fireflies arrive, not in great number, not with ceremony, just enough. Blink, pause, blink. A park ranger moves past slowly, checking the lantern fuel. You notice his steps are measured to match the cadence of the insects, farther along the path. Someone plays a traditional flute, very quietly. A few notes, then silence again. Not performance, just presence. You glance at one of the posted poems, framed under glass beside the trail. We built this for them, not to keep, but to welcome. May they still arrive. That's the feeling here. Not ownership, invitation. And though the park is newly made, the fireflies don't seem to care. They blink as they always have, indifferent to history, content to glow for whoever is patient enough to notice. So you notice, and you keep walking, slowly. The night is nearly done, but the light still arrives. You're nearly alone now. The formal paths are behind you. The benches are empty. The signage ends. You've wandered beyond the built garden, into a fringe of reeds and stone that wasn't meant for guests, but doesn't object to your presence. The night is quieter than before, but it's a deeper quiet, less managed, more natural, the kind that settles not only around you, but into you. This is what remains when the crowd has gone, when the lanterns have burned low, when even the park rangers have stopped adjusting things. This is the moment the fireflies seem to prefer. You pause beside a bend in the path, where the edge of a pond slips into darkness. There's no fencing here, no light, just a gentle slope of damp earth and the steady creaking of frogs in the distance. And then, blink. One, a little closer this time. Blink. Another. No swarm, no show, just the slow, final notes of a symphony no one conducted. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In recent years, Firefly festivals across Japan have adapted to the realities of modern life, some embracing quiet, others struggling with crowds and technology. At popular viewing sites like those in Tsukiono or Oki Island, signs remind visitors not to use flash photography, to whisper, to avoid blocking the paths. Many parks now hold silent evenings once a week. No performances, no vendors, just entry and light. And even with all these measures, attendance continues to rise. People don't come to see something new. They come hoping to feel something old. Fringe Detail One Modern Firefly Guide in Gifu Prefecture begins each tour with a bow to the insects, not the guests. She explains softly, they are not here for us, but we may still share the evening. You walk a little farther now, into a space that no longer seems designed. No borders, just earth and sky. The fireflies are here in small numbers, 3, 4, drifting like the last few syllables of a sentence you almost remember. Here's your scholarly uncertainty. Are we preserving the tradition or recreating it? Some suggest we've moved from ritual into reenactment, an echo of something no longer entirely possible. But others argue that the essence remains, not in the accuracy, in the attention. As long as we are still willing to be quiet, to stand still for the light, we are still practicing the same thing. You sit now, not on a bench, but on the ground. A little damp, a little uneven. It doesn't matter. The fireflies seem unbothered. One drifts close enough to brush your sleeve. Another passes behind you, like a thought you never quite finished. And this is your final journey-style immersion, not walking, not observing, but resting in witness. You're no longer waiting for a firefly to appear. You're allowing yourself to be near whatever remains. You close your eyes. You open them again. They're still there. A poem returns to you, one you saw earlier. Perhaps, or only think you did even now. They blink, not because we're watching them, but because it's night. You breathe, you stay. You don't need a guide anymore. The fireflies are fewer, yes, but they're not less, because in this moment, even one glow is enough, and you are exactly where the light still comes. There's no more path now, just open ground and quiet water. You're standing near the edge of a pond that no longer mirrors anything. It simply holds the darkness. Gently, like a memory it isn't ready to forget. The fireflies are still here, but they don't move much anymore. They blink slower now, like someone turning the pages of a book they've read before. And you, well, you've stopped looking for them. You're just aware of them, like breath, like stars, like the rhythm your thoughts settle into once they stop trying to impress you. You sit once more, not to see better, just because the ground invites it. The air is cooler than it was. The reeds lean inward. Even the frogs have grown less confident in their voices. And here, just here, where everything softens, your evening folds into its final shape. The fireflies blink slower now. The trees no longer cast shadows. The pond no longer reflects. The air, still warm, wraps gently around your shoulders, and the scent of moss and riverstone lingers, as if the night itself has exhaled. You've walked far, not in distance, but in rhythm, through gardens, poems, families, rivers, through centuries, through spaces designed not to entertain, but to soothe. You've watched the light rise and fall. You've shared a moment with strangers who didn't need to speak. You've sat beside a child catching nothing and smiled anyway. And now, as the fireflies begin to drift back into stillness, you can feel your own quiet matching theirs. There's nothing more to see, nothing more to chase. Only this, the comfort of being where the light has been and where it may return. The tradition of firefly viewing wasn't built on spectacle, it was built on slowness, on attention, on not needing a reason to be still. You can take that with you now. You don't need lanterns. You don't need scrolls. Just the memory of a blinking dot in the dark and the sense of peace it brought with no effort at all. Let your body settle now. Let your thoughts grow faint. There's nothing to hold, nothing to name, just rest and rhythm. And maybe, in the quiet space behind your closed eyes, a tiny light will flicker once more, asking for nothing and offering everything. You've arrived at the soft edge of night, and you can stay here as long as you like.